Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought we would continue today with the suggestions past the developers, and this time we actually have something special. For December, we have the helicopters, and it seems like a lot of them got passed this time, and if I'm honest, these are some weird and wonky and funky and fun ones, which is something I feel like we don't really talk about too much in helicopters, because a lot of helicopters are just kind of standard, and there's nothing really that interesting about them. Well, these ones, there's a lot of stuff here which is pretty cool, so I'm really looking forward to kind of sharing them with you. As always, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe, and let's get started. The first helicopter is the Piasecki H-21C. This is a huge helicopter, which was a tandem rotor utility helicopter produced by Piasecki, which would be later known as Vertol. This was used as an Army and Air Force successor to their previous Navy design, which was the HR-P2 Rescuer. It was known as the Workhorse, or later as the Shawnee. The contract was awarded to Piasecki on February of 1950, with the first model taking flight in April of 1952, and accepted into Army and USAF service in 1953. There were three different variants of the H-21. You had the A, which was based on the original YH-21, probably the prototype, the H-21B, which was the A but with better engines, and then you had the H-21C, which was the Army version of the B model. The H-21 was too late to enter the Korean War, and it was therefore pressed into combat service during the Vietnam War by 1961. While promising during use in the US, problems were immediately apparent when the aircraft's power plant struggled with the climate in Vietnam. On top of this, the large unarmored silhouette of the aircraft proved to be very susceptible to shoot-downs by small arms fire. Despite these apparent shortcomings, the H-21 was the Army's mainstay utility helicopter until 1964, when it was finally replaced by Bell's iconic UH-1 Iroquois. By 1965, the H-21 had been completely withdrawn from frontline service, and two experimental models, known as the H-21D, which were powered by two turboshafts rather than a single radial engine, while these would not enter production, they would become the basis for Vertol's CH-46C Knight, which is kind of fun. The armaments of the vehicle are also a bit spicy. Similar to Sikorsky's H-34 Choctaw, the H-21 was subject to many early armament experiments by the US military. The H-21 was one of the few types that fell victim to Vanderpool's Fools, a group of Fort Rucker commanded by Colonel J.D. Vanderpool during the 1950s to investigate the possibility of turning helicopters into weapon platforms. The group tested a few configurations with the H-21, but none were more iconic than fitting of a B-29 turret on the underside of the cockpit. While it would retain door guns during the brief service in Vietnam, the rest of the armament would be experimental. It had a bunch of door guns, but mainly the stuff that you're looking for is rockets. It could have the Oerlikon anti-tank rockets or the FFAR rockets, and also a bunch of 50 cals, M37s as well, and M60Cs, and of course the B-29 turret as well. So the main thing you're getting on this thing is machine guns and also rockets. They did also try a bunch of different setups too, with, different guns all over the place, and it is kind of wild looking at the pictures of them because of how they're actually mounted on the machine. It is a completely crazy machine at the end of the day. We have a specific variant of the Mi-24D for the Germans as well. The Hind itself was born around 1972 of a design idea for a heavy ground attack helicopter that could also transport a proud amount of landing troops in its rear cabin. While the troop transport role was soon found to be less than worthy or even usable, the Hind continued on its journey into becoming a true heavy ground attack helicopter, starting its origins from the Mi-24A all the way to the modern Mi-35P Phoenix. The Hind has proven itself a capable weapon system in many a conflict all around the world. It has enjoyed large export success to around 50 countries in the world, as well as a good many number of scored victories despite its large size and even being called names such as Satan's Chariot. The Hind was actually such a good helicopter that even after the reunification of East and West Germany, the German Air Force kept its old bird in service until finally it was replaced by the Eurocopter Tiger. Many were sold off to Hungary but were kept for testing at WTD-61. One such specimen is a true head-scratcher, an Mi-24D with the seeker of an Mi-M23 Hawk missile seeker in the place of its gun. It's the Mi-24D 98+31. It was used by the WTD-61 in Manching during 1994. While it's not known why this seeker was attached, it's still kind of an interesting vehicle. The Air Doc number 4 for Luftwaffe fitter the Su-22 in German service gives a short answer and also with a caption to a picture. For the evaluation of the Hawk SAM missile seeker head, both the fitter's wings were painted white, and the Mi-24 was the carrier of the seeker head. Strange. The terrain bounce abilities of the SPS-141 jamming pod on the Su-22 were tested in an interplay with the Hawk seeker head on the chin of the Mi-24, which is just so weird to think about. So this is just an Mi-24D with the seeker head of a missile on the front of it. For Britain, we have the Westland Wessex Commando Mark I. This vehicle is essentially a HAS-1, which had its ASW equipment removed to make space for troops. These helicopters were mainly used in the Commando assault role, providing Royal Marines with the ability to be inserted and removed from locations quickly, in addition to allowing for deeper penetration into enemy territory. These helicopters were a step up from the generally unarmed helicopters previously used for insertion, and were a much more mature example than the rather experimental armed whirlwinds which had been tested out in combat in Southeast Asia. Despite this, they were still an interim option until the more capable Wessex HU-5s would enter service. The Commando Mark I and the HU-5 differed mainly in their engines, with the HU-5 using of two Rolls-Royce Gnomes instead of a single Napier Gazelle engine the Commando used, which gave more power, which allowed for heavier loads and greater performance compared to the Mark I. This is one way to distinguish between the two types, with the two smaller exhaust pipes signifying the Commando Mark I, and a single, larger exhaust pipe on either side denoting a HU-5. Although not in service for long, the Commando Mark Is would ultimately still see combat in Borneo. The Mark Is were able to carry a variety of weapons, including gun pods and rockets, as well as the AS-11 anti-tank missiles. This gave a huge capability boost to the Royal Marines, whose helicopters could now directly respond to rapidly changing threats on the ground, thus allowing for more flexible operations. For Japan, we have the Kawasaki-Bell 47G-2 or the H-13H. The Bell 47 is an American light multi-role helicopter that the Japanese bought in 1953. From 52 to 65, the Bell 47 helicopters were licensed at the Kawasaki plant, and the Japanese armed the Bell 47G-2, which they themselves called the H-13H. The Bell 47 was developed by Bell Aircraft Corporation in 1943. It was created from the prototype Bell 30 helicopter, and the first prototype took to the air on the 8th of December 1945 and was adopted by the United States Army in 1946. In 53, the most popular model, the G version, was created, and in this version, the cockpit was modified, the engine was changed, and the fuel tanks were changed, and the tail boom was completely uncovered. The Japanese Land Self-Defense Force inherited 13 Bell 47D-1 helicopters from the National Safety Agency. JDSDF liked these helicopters very much, so they decided to purchase additional Bell helicopters for reconnaissance purposes. They decided to use the Bell 47G-2 version and immediately purchased licenses for the production of these helicopters at the Kawasaki plant. Between 57 and 64, 75 helicopters were delivered to the JDSDF, and in 1959, the JDSDF observed that various countries, USSR, US, and others, were modifying helicopters to carry armaments. It was decided that the Bell 47G-2 should be armed with weapons, and in 1960, tests of the H-13H, or the 47G-2, helicopter armed with an M1919 Browning machine gun began. The M20 Kai-4 89mm launchers, which was a super bazooka, and unguided FFAR missiles were also assembled. And in September 1960, The information about it was published in the Aviation Information magazine. Work on the development of the armed H-13H continued, but it was very slow. In 1964, the Japanese adopted the Type 64 MAT, or the ATM-1 missiles, and it was decided to mount them on the H-13H helicopter. The March 1967 issue of Aviation Information magazine features photos of the modified aircraft and information about its general armament. It is hoped that the JAGSDF will soon have a fleet of armed helicopters. Unfortunately, for unknown reasons, the project was discontinued, and the H-13H helicopters were used only as reconnaissance and training helicopters. The last one was withdrawn in 1977. For China, we have an AH-64, specifically the H-64E Guardian. The AH-64, which was developed in the 1970s as part of the US Army's Advanced Armed Helicopter Program, served as a replacement for the H-1 Cobra. 5 manufacturers, including Boeing, Bell, Hughes, Lockheed, and Sikorsky, competed for the program before the US Department of Defense ultimately chose the huge YAH-64 helicopter. Following the selection, the YAH-64 proceeded to the second phase of bidding, and in 1976, the US Department of Defense announced Hughes Helicopter Company, later acquired by McDonnell Douglas, as the winner of the YAH-64 contract. The H-64E enhancements encompass various improvements such as the upgraded data link system and landing gear, as well as the integration of the Joint Tactical Radio System. Additionally, it features a more robust T700G 701D engine, a reduction gear system tailored for high-powered engines, and new composite rotor blades. Furthermore, it possesses the capability to control unmanned aerial vehicles, among other advancements. The United States received an order from the Taiwanese Army for 30 H-64E armed helicopters. The initial shipment of 6 helicopters was transported to Kaohsiung Port by sea on the 4th of November 2013, with additional deliveries made in July of 2014. These H-64Es are currently being utilized by the Taiwanese Army Air Force. Unfortunately, on the 25th of April 2014, an ROCAF AH-64E crashed into the roof of a residential house in Longtan District, Taiyuan City, resulting in injuries to both pilots and rendering the helicopter irreparable. The remaining 29 helicopters are still in service as of 2024 and are planned to be used past 2030. That is some of the helicopters that have been past the developers. As always, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shea, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.